2025, the global financial system crossed a historic threshold. The US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves fell to roughly 40%, which is the lowest level in more than 20 years. Over the past decade, the dollar lost 18 percentage points of reserve share as central banks steadily reduced their reliance on a single currency. At the same time, gold made a decisive comeback. Central banks increased gold's share of reserves by 12 percentage points, pushing it to 28%, which is the highest level since the early 1990s. For the first time in modern history, gold now represents a larger share of global reserves than the euro, Japanese yen, and British pound combined. This shift did not happen overnight. Rising geopolitical tensions, sanctions, and currency weaponization forced policymakers to rethink risk. Holding dollars meant exposure to American policy and financial systems. Gold, by contrast, carried no counterparty risk, no default risk, and no political allegiance. It could not be frozen, sanctioned, or devalued by decree. Central banks, meanwhile, responded accordingly. They accelerated gold purchases, moving physical bullion into domestic vaults at a pace not seen in decades. These flows fundamentally altered markets. In 2025, gold prices surged 65%, marking their strongest annual performance since 1979. Meanwhile, the USD index fell 9.4%, which is its worst yearly decline in 8 years. Experts say this is not the end of the dollar, but is the end of unquestioned dominance. The world began transitioning toward a more multipolar reserve system where trust is spread across assets rather than concentrated in one currency. Gold's rise reflects that reality. It is no longer just a hedge, it is becoming the foundation of a new global financial balance. That shift will reshape reserves, markets, power, and monetary strategy worldwide.
Anti-ICE protests are intensifying in the United States after back-to-back shooting incidents involving U.S. federal agents. In the latest, 2 people were shot and then wounded by Border Patrol agents in Portland, and this comes after a woman was in fact gunned down by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The White House maintains that the law enforcement acted as per protocol, but state leaders and activists are demanding accountability. The crowds filled the streets in Minneapolis and Portland overnight. The protesters chanted anti-ICE slogans and confronted the heavily armed federal officers. The pepper balls and tear gas were used to try and push the crowds back. Several arrests have been made by the American forces, and the demonstrations are also spreading nationwide.
No justice, no peace. We want ICE out now. ICE out now. ICE out now. ICE.
New York to Washington to California to Texas and Georgia.
What do we do? Are we going to be intimidated? And we will continue to.
I feel like we're at a turning point. I can't say it enough, but things have got to change. But we're coming together. And if any place, it's going to be Minnesota, or get out of here. We don't want you. You have no right to be here. You're destroying our communities. Just leave.
It has also reacted to the deadly shooting. The Ministry of External Affairs says that they are closely following the developments as they are concerned for a large Indian community in the United States, including students and professionals.
We are closely following the developments in and around Minneapolis shooting. We are concerned as we have a large Indian diaspora or Indian community, a large Indian community in the United States, including large number of students. We also have a large number of professionals and other people, so naturally it's a matter of concern for us.
Now, the unrest was triggered by the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good. She was shot by an ICE agent during an immigration operation in Minneapolis from point-blank range. This is how it unfolded. The federal officials say that the lady tried to drive away, claiming her car blocked the agents and posed a threat. They say that the officer acted in self-defense. The Vice President J.D. Vance doubled down on self-defense, saying that the death of the woman was a tragedy of her own making. But Minnesota officials dispute the account. Video footage reviewed by the lawmakers appears to clearly contradict the claims that the Trump administration and his officials are making. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz has called the protest to be patriotic. He has demanded for state participation in the investigation, but federal authorities have reversed course, blocking state investigators and taking sole control of the probe. Now, J.D. Vance called the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz a complete joke. And just a day later in Portland, the Border Patrol agents shot and wounded a man and a woman during what the authorities called was a targeted vehicle stop. The Department of Homeland Security claimed that the driver tried to run the agents over, and it said that an officer fired a defensive shot. The local police say that they are not involved, and the FBI is now leading the investigation. The Trump administration says that officers are facing rising threats and are enforcing the law under some dangerous conditions. The larger picture is that some critics are arguing federal agents are using excessive force, and they're calling it an aggressive immigration crackdown with investigations ongoing and protests growing. America's immigration debate is once again spilling onto the streets, raising fear and questions amongst the people there.
Change our plates every morning, just so you know. It'll be the same plate when you come talk to us later. That's fine. U.S. citizen, former veteran. You want to come at us? You want to come at us? I say go get yourself some lunch, big boy. Go ahead.
Out of the car. Get out of the car. Get out of the car.
Out now!
In freezing rain, hundreds marched through Minneapolis criticizing the surge in ICE agents.
People are still waking up and kind of like responding to the horror of what happened yesterday.
The Twin Cities a powder keg as anger has boiled over in response to the shooting death of 37-year-old Renee Good at the hands of an ICE agent on Wednesday.
It feels very, very difficult that we will get a fair outcome.
Minnesota Governor Tim Walz raised concerns Thursday as the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension says they were informed by the FBI that state prosecutors would no longer have access to the investigation, which started as a joint probe. Vice President J.D. Vance.
The unprecedented thing is the idea that a local official can actually prosecute a federal official with absolute immunity.
CBS News has confirmed the agent who shot Renee Good is Jonathan Ross. He's worked with ICE in Minnesota for nearly a decade. During an ICE operation last summer in nearby Bloomington, video shows Ross being dragged by a suspect during an attempted arrest.
33 stitches in his leg, so you think maybe he's a little bit sensitive about somebody ramming him with an automobile?
The Trump administration and President Trump have maintained the agent acted in self-defense.
I found it, to be honest, the department's official statement and the secretary's statements were really irresponsible.
John Sandwick, former acting director of ICE, raised concerns about maintaining public confidence. Despite the calls to leave, DHS says ICE agents will continue their operation in Minnesota. Jared Hill, CBS News.
I am concerned about that, and we should not be limiting funding for Homeland Security at a dangerous time. We need public officials to allow law enforcement to do their jobs, and immigration and customs enforcement is a critically important function of the government. It is a top concern for Americans, as demonstrated by the last election cycle, and this is not a time to be limiting funding. I think that's a terrible idea.
Greenland, Trump, and the threat of shooting. Well, even without NATO. Yes, you heard that right. What started as a tweet from the US President Donald Trump, it has now turned into a full-blown diplomatic standoff in the Arctic. You're watching Times XP. It's me, Dhriti Atri, and let's talk what's really happening here. President Donald Trump has repeatedly called Greenland a national security priority. He even hinted at a full US takeover of this icy territory. But Greenland is not just ice and snow. It is a strategic Arctic land, rich in minerals, positioned in a geopolitically sensitive zone, and officially part of Denmark. And Denmark is not joking here. The Danish government has issued an extraordinary warning. There are troops in Greenland, they are on high alert, and they have standing orders. If any country, even a NATO ally, like the US tries to invade, our troops will open fire immediately. Yes, fire on the US forces if necessary. The message is loud, it is clear, and it is historic. 7 European nations and NATO members, they have publicly backed Denmark. They reaffirmed that Greenland is Danish territory and it is not for sale. Well, this is not just about land, it's about sovereignty, international law, and the balance of power in the Arctic. But you know why Greenland is so important now? Strategic military location in the Arctic, access to untapped natural resources, be it anything, mineral, oil, gas, control over Arctic shipping routes as polar ice melts, and proximity to North America, making it a key piece in the US and NATO defenses. Basically, in short, whosoever controls Greenland controls a critical Arctic getaway. The risk? Well, while analysts say war is unlikely, tensions are skyrocketing. Escalating rhetoric between the US and Denmark is reviving the Cold War era fears. And the Arctic, long seen as remote and peaceful, could become the new flashpoint for the global conflict. In fact, NATO is under strain. This isn't a normal disagreement between countries, it is an internal clash within a military alliance. NATO was built on trust. If one member is attacked, others come for help. But what if a NATO ally threatens to invade another ally? Trust cracks, alliances weaken, and suddenly the Arctic is no longer a quiet, icy frontier. It becomes a geopolitical hotspot. So the world is asking what happens next. Well, Trump may continue calling Greenland a national security priority. Denmark will likely keep its troops really ready. The world will watch as diplomats scramble to prevent a confrontation that could destabilize NATO and the Arctic region. In the end, this is more than politics. It's about sovereignty, global power, and the Arctic future. Greenland is small in population, but its strategic values is enormous. And now, it is at the center of a politically explosive showdown between the US and Denmark, with NATO caught in the middle.
It may not be farming, but for the farmers lighting fires and blocking highways in southern Belgium, their future is at stake. These are just some of those across Europe protesting against a free trade deal between the European Union and Mercosur. Signs reading, "As children we dream, as adults we die," are an indicator of what they believe will happen once this deal becomes a reality. That has already now come to pass. The EU on Friday announced the deal had been agreed, 21 countries supporting it, with Austria, France, Hungary, Ireland and Poland voting against. Belgium abstained.
It seems to me that the balance that has been created is a sustainable one, and I hope that the agreement will bring benefits in many areas, as I believe it will, and hopefully for everyone.
The free trade agreement will be the biggest the EU has ever signed in terms of the tariffs it will remove on goods worth almost $5 billion. European exports like machinery, chemicals and transport equipment will all now be sold in higher numbers and at lower prices in South America, a huge potential boon to some of Europe's struggling economies. Yet there are concerns about Europe's farmer produce, which will now have to compete with cheaper competition from South America. Farmers marched through Poland's capital Warsaw on Friday, demanding the deal be cancelled. Similar action was seen in Greece, the Netherlands, France and elsewhere. Some warning there will be more to come.
We won't be able to compete with Mercosur, or for example with Ukraine, where everything is cheaper, labor is cheaper, and plant protection products, they can use whatever anyone comes up with there.
The European Commission has put in place some import controls and offered additional support for European farmers, yet there are others that may be worried by the deal. US exports will now face stiffer competition in both South America and the EU, at a time when the United States is once again trying to assert its hemispheric influence in places like Venezuela. This could be a source of tension with the Trump administration, already comfortable with leveraging high tariffs on others. The EU and Mercosur may be celebrating this deal as a victory. few disagree its implications will prove historic. Joel Flynn, TRT World.
تم التسليم بين قوات درع الوطن وقوات العمالقة، والحمد لله الأمور ستبه والأمن على ما يرام، ونسأل التوفيق للقوات التي استلمت والتي غادرت، ونشكر القيادة السياسية في هذا الوطن، ولا يوجد أي اختلالات، ونطمن المواطنين بأن الأمور تمشي على ما يرام.
Starlink вытаскивается сюда и, соответственно, вставляется.
Putin has deployed war horses with Starlink satellite dishes mounted on their backs in the latest bizarre frontline sighting. The tech, developed by Elon Musk, is being used in a bid to boost internet coverage in remote areas on the battlefield. Footage shows the small satellite dishes, which provide broadband access, strapped onto the horse saddles. The equipment will give Russian troops the chance to stream live footage from the front line, potentially allowing coordinated assaults and aiding drone strikes. Russian units have been increasingly sending cavalry to the front line in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine claims Putin's army has been forced to revert to old-fashioned warfare due to their loss of equipment. Just last month, Ukraine's 92nd Brigade posted footage of drones hunting down Russian soldiers as they gallop through a field on horseback. The brigade wrote, "Russian occupiers lose so much equipment during their meat grinder assaults that they're forced to move on horseback."
Ukraine said this is the powerful hypersonic missile Russia fired into the western region overnight. The strike was part of a barrage in which Moscow launched 242 drones and 35 other missiles at infrastructure. The target was near the border with NATO and EU member Poland. European allies branded the hit as an attempt to intimidate them from supporting Ukraine. Moscow, which has fired the Oreshnik once before at Ukraine, said the strike was an act of retaliation. It was a response, Russia said, to an attempted drone attack on one of President Vladimir Putin's residences last month. Ukraine denies this attack, calling it an absurd lie, and the United States has also said this did not happen. Moscow says the Oreshnik is impossible to intercept. Defence expert Sebastian Tube said the deadly strike showcased Russia's capabilities.
It is obviously a bit of a warning sign, not only to Ukraine, but also the rest of Europe, considering the cutting-edge technologies that have been used in this attack. Within Europe, there's only a very limited capability that can be effectively utilized against this type of threat.
Residents in Ukraine's capital described the night attack as an act of terror, with one saying it undermines the ongoing peace talks. Ukraine has met with the US and European allies this week in Paris to negotiate a peace deal before presenting it to Russia. Moscow has shown little indication thus far that it will drop its demands.
All right, now the United States has seized a fifth Venezuela-linked oil tanker loaded with oil. The tanker, known as Olena, was seized in the Caribbean Sea by the Americans. Now, the U.S. Southern Command has put out the video of their raid on social media. They claim that these Marines were launched from the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier for a pre-dawn raid. As you can see, these American Marines boarded this fully loaded oil tanker and then obviously took control of it. The U.S. Southern Command has said that they apprehended the Olena without any incident, and that, quote, there is no safe haven for criminals or sanctioned Venezuelan ships. Now, Olena is in fact the fifth oil tanker that the Americans have seized in recent weeks. The first, of course, was the Skipper, which has been categorized as a VLCC, a very large crude carrier. And when the US seized that ship, they said that it was a sanctioned vessel that was used to transport Venezuelan oil all the way to Iran. On the 20th of December, the Americans seized the Centuries. It was another supertanker which was flying the flag of Panama. It was intercepted in the Caribbean east of Barbados. Back then, Venezuela had labeled these seizures to be serious acts of international piracy on the part of the Americans, who were effectively, according to Nicolas Maduro, who was still in Caracas at that time, was Americans stealing Venezuela's oil. Since then, Americans have, of course, captured Nicolas Maduro and have taken him away to the United States of America. Now, there was a bit of a lull before and after the U.S. abduction of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, but earlier in the week, the Americans seized 2 more oil tankers. Firstly, there was the M. Sophia that was seized in the Caribbean. The United States claimed that this was a stateless, sanctioned dark fleet vessel, and it was said to be carrying oil all the way to China. And the other seizure, which took place on the 7th of January, was that of a ship called Marinera. The ship earlier had gone by the name Bella One. This capture was pretty unique because the ship was seized all the way in the northern part of the Atlantic near Iceland. The ship had broken the U.S. naval blockade around Venezuela, but the U.S., of course, gave chase for 2 weeks until it was seized, and there was a Russian submarine, another warship close by. The Marinera was a Russian-flagged tanker, and there was a Russian submarine that had been deployed to safeguard the ship, but the Russian submarine did not intervene when the Americans, of course, rappelled down from the helicopter to seize the vessel. At least about 3 Indians were amongst the 28-member crew of the Marinera, and there were also 2 Russian crew members. Moscow has confirmed that 2 Russian crew members have now been released after Russia made a request to the American President Donald Trump. Now, the United States has seized its 5th tanker, the Olena, and earlier in the day, the American President Donald Trump reiterated that all Venezuelan ships will have to stay in place. He said that the United States and Venezuela's new interim government will work together to rebuild the country's oil infrastructure, but the blockade has not been lifted.
In Tel Aviv. I try.
Martha, good afternoon. Protests continue to erupt across Iran in multiple cities. Clashes reported there as human rights organizations say demonstrations are now unfolding in more than 111 different locations. We do know a general strike is also underway in major population centers. New video shows Iranians destroying a flag in northeast Iran. These protests began in late December over the country's weak currency and poor living conditions, but have now expanded amid broader anti-government sentiments. In an effort to calm the rising tension, the government in Tehran passed a bill this week to pay all Iranian households the equivalent of $7 a month.
In my view, they saw that they couldn't rein in the inflation, so they said, let's give people 1 million tomans so that we can somehow absorb the pressure, to hold it back. I mean, it's like a temporary painkiller.
Amid the backdrop of ongoing demonstrations, some Iranian leadership traveled to Lebanon, where the country's foreign minister held a press conference. This comes as Israel is continuing to launch airstrikes against Iran's proxy there, Hezbollah, that officials in Jerusalem say is regrouping, and as the region braces for the possibility of another direct war between Israel and Iran.
We are fully prepared for any situation. We don't want war, but we are ready for war. We are also ready for negotiations, but only negotiations that are based off mutual interests and respect.
President Trump warning again today that Iranian leadership will pay hell if they shoot these demonstrators that are currently marching through the streets of their country. We know tonight there are reports of the internet being cut and fires across the capital of Tehran.
Iran's supreme leader is signaling that his country is preparing to crack down on the demonstrators who've been protesting across the Islamic Republic over the last several days. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in particular targeted U.S. President Donald Trump. Trump in recent days has said that America is willing to use force to protect peaceful protesters in Iran should the theocracy there try to kill them. All this comes after demonstrations overnight that were sparked in part by a call from exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. That call saw thousands enter the streets in Tehran and elsewhere across the country. Now, Iranian state television today is calling those people terrorists. They're showing footage of fires in the streets and mosques and other buildings damaged. But there is a lot of anger in Iran, both over the economic situation and against Iran's theocracy, which has been in power since the 1979 Islamic Revolution.
Iran's Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi has been in exile for nearly 50 years. His father, Iran's Shah, was so widely hated that millions took to the streets against him in 1979, forcing him from power. Now Pahlavi is trying to position himself as a player in his country's future. From exile in the United States, Pahlavi successfully spurred demonstrators onto the streets Thursday night in a massive escalation of the protests sweeping Iran. Initially sparked by the Islamic Republic's ailing economy, the demonstrations have become a serious challenge to its theocracy, battered by years of nationwide protests and a 12-day war in June launched by Israel that saw the US bomb nuclear enrichment sites. Pahlavi has issued new calls rebroadcast by Farsi-language satellite news channels and websites abroad for Iranians to return to the streets Friday night. It's still unknown how much real support the 65-year-old has in his homeland. The first term of President Donald Trump saw Pahlavi's profile rise again. Still, Trump and other world leaders have so far been hesitant about embracing him, given the many cautionary tales in the Mideast and elsewhere of Western governments putting their faith in exiles long estranged from their homelands.
We stand at a crossroads.
Iranian state media, which for years mocked Pahlavi as being out of touch and corrupt, blamed, quote, monarchist terrorist elements for the demonstrations Thursday night that saw vehicles burned and police property attacked.
در این تجمعات خودروهای شخصی مردم، موتورسیکلت‌ها، اماکن عمومی مثل مترو و خودروهای آتش‌نشانی و اتوبوس به آتش کشیده شد. در برخی شهرهای کشور هم عوامل تروریست تحت حمایت آمریکا و رژیم صهیونی خسارات زیادی به اموال عمومی و شخصی مردم وارد کردند. اقدامات این تروریست‌ها در برخی از شهرها چند جان باخته و زخمی در پی داشت که اطلاعات تکمیلی آن در بخش‌های بعدی خبر به اطلاع شما خواهد رسید.
سیماس میبینین آتیشی زدن ایول
تخریبگر آمدن ساختمان متعلق به کشور خودشون رو خراب کردن. مثلا فرض کنید فلان ساختمان دیواری رو خراب کردن برای که دل رئیس جمهور آمریکا خوش بیاد.
شد جلسی ایفته دیما جاوید شاه
آتیش زدن ماشین پلیس، اون یکی هم رو اون پشت آتیش زدن، 2 ماشین پلیس آتیش زدن توی است.
قسم دیما سمندای نیروی انتظامی بلوار دو میدان آتیش زدن. همین ماشین
18 دی دوپردشت میزنن.
دیشب در تهران در بعضی جای دیگه یه مش تخریبگر آمدن ساختمان متعلق به کشور خودشون رو خراب کردن. مثلا فرض کنید فلان ساختمان دیواری رو خراب کردن برای که دل رئیس جمهور آمریکا خوش بیاد. چون او گفته که حرف بی ربطی که اگر چنانچه دولت ایران چنین کنه من میام به طرف شما رو میگیرم، این طرف این اغتشاشگرها و افراد مضر برای کشور، این هم دلشون خوشه. او اگه میتونه کشور خودش رو اداره کنه، تو کشور خودش حوادث گوناگونی وجود داره. او دستش به خون بیش از 1000 ایرانی آلوده است. در جنگ 12 روزه 1000 و اندی از هممیهنان ما، حالا غیر از سرداران و دانشمندان و بزرگان، از آحاد مردم به شهادت رسیدن. این شخص گفت که من دستور دادم، من در جنگ فرماندهی کردم. پس اعتراف کرد دستش به خون ایرانیا آلوده است. اون وقت میگه من طرفدار ملت ایرانم. یه مش آدم بی تجربه و بی توجه و فکر نکرده هم باور میکنن و قبول میکنن و طبق میل او عمل میکنن. سد آشغال آتیش میزنن برای که او خوشش بیاد. همه بدونن جمهوری اسلامی با خون چند صد هزار انسان شریف روی کار آمده، در مقابل کسانی که تخریبگرند جمهوری اسلامی کوتاه نخواهد آمد. مزدوری بیگانگان رو تحمل نمیکنه. شما هر کی میخوای باش مزدور بیگانه که شدی، برای بیگانه که کار کردی ملت تو رو مردود میدانه. نظام اسلامی هم تو رو مردود میدانه. این مربوط به اینها. اون بابایی که با نخوت و غرور نشسته اونجا راجع به همه دنیا قضاوت میکنه، او هم بدانه که معمولاً مستبدین و مستکبران عالم از قبیل فرعون و نمرود و رضاخان و محمد رضا و امثال اینها وقتی که در اوج غرور بودند سرنگون شدند. این هم سرنگون خواهد شد.